Captain George Daum,
Thank you
welcome
very
to
much.
the podcast.
It's great to be here.
Now, you're actually the second American military person that I've had on this podcast. The first was Colonel Lee Ellis. Ever heard of Lee Ellis? I know you're Navy, he's Army. He spent 5.5 years in the Hanoi Hilton prison camp. Yeah, so and that was a fascinating conversation. Now, you are a naval aviator or an ex-naval aviator, like myself, but you had a rather more distinguished and exciting career than my paltry 8 years. Tell us so before we get into your career highlights, what inspired you to pursue a career in naval aviation? And was aviation that you joined for?
Yeah,
and
that's
that
correct.
was the passion?
You know, I grew up, I'm going to date myself here, but I grew up during the Vietnam War. And so when I graduated from high school, very few people in my friend group were interested in going into the military. But my father had served in World War II and in the Navy. And while he never made it a big deal in terms of pushing, I was the youngest of 3 boys. I knew it was important to him that one of us had a military experience, whether it was just for a couple years or a career, but just something. So I signed up to apply for the Navy ROTC program. And this is a program where you can go to one of many different civilian colleges. And when you graduate, you become commissioned and go off to serve whatever. And so I did that, and that's what got me interested in the Navy. And then in the summertime, they give you opportunities to see what you could go into. So I spent a week on a submarine, a couple weeks on a destroyer, a couple weeks with the Marine Corps, and then a couple weeks where I got to do some flying. And when I got a backseat flight in a TA-4 Skyhawk jet, that really hooked me. And so after I graduated, I went off to flight school, and 26 years later, I'm walking out of the Pentagon saying that was a pretty cool time.
Yeah, awesome. And I tell you what, I bet you the week in the submarine didn't even want to join submarines.
It was a little claustrophobic, yeah.
They are very specialist individuals, aren't they, submariners? There's no doubt about that.
Unique characters.
And so, George, like you had a pretty distinguished career, ending up as Navy captain. And anybody who knows Army, it's very, very different. What's the equivalent
Colonel.
rank in the Army? I forget. I've been out so long. Colonel, yeah. So, and you've been commander of flight squadrons on aircraft carriers, which the Americans do aircraft carriers a lot better than the British do. And you also ran the Blue Angels, which is anybody from the UK, the Red Arrows, I think is the equivalent, right? So, which just must have been amazing. And then you were an instructor at Top Gun. So give us a couple of highlights from those different areas, your time on the carrier, your time in the Blue Angels, and the time on Top Gun, and what was your favorite?
During my career, I had the opportunity to deploy 9 times on the aircraft carrier around the world. Got to, of course, see some very interesting places, and participated in combat actions against Libya and, of course, against Iraq during Desert Storm, and also in the Adriatic in Kosovo against the Serbs and so forth. So it was a very exciting opportunity. But the neat part about living in, of course, the flying off the carrier is just very exciting. And on a beautiful day, or even at nighttime, if you have a good horizon and a steady deck, don't tell anybody this, but we would pay money to do it. We call it the sport of kings, and it's just fabulous sport. And we grade every landing in order to channel that type A personalities to try to land it perfectly on the carrier, and that then enhances our safety level, right? So, but then in bad weather, nighttime, there's something wrong with the carrier, there's something wrong with the airplane, and the deck's moving, that's when you really earn your pay.
Mm.
But the highlight for that experience for me was being on a ship of literally 5,000 people that come from all walks of life in our country, all economic backgrounds, all religions, ethnicities, and we come together under a common mission and shared sacrifice. And it's really just a wonderful experience to be a part of that. The morale is great. And so that was my big takeaway from that experience. Top Gun was interesting in that, again, I'm going to date myself, but I checked in as a young bachelor lieutenant to become a Top Gun instructor in San Diego a month after the first movie came out.
Oh my goodness, are you
so life
serious?
was pretty good for Lieutenant Dom there, where you had to come to work to rest up.
Compatibles.
But that was a wonderful experience because that whole organization is driven to find out how good can you get in the airplane and how well can you teach the students that come through in order for them to take it back to their squadrons and teach them the latest and greatest tactics and standard operating procedures and what the threat is up to and so forth. And the idea is we train the trainers, they go back to their squadrons, and then they raise the level of because interestingly, the Top Gun got started during the Vietnam War, and there was a real challenge because historically, we had enjoyed about a 10-to-1 ratio in air-to-air combat during World War II and during Korea. And in Vietnam, the ratio came down to like 2 to 3 to 1, and that just wasn't acceptable, right? And so they did a big study to find out why aren't we performing better, and some of it was technical, some of it was logistics, some of the missiles and so forth were getting damaged in shipment out to the Pacific. But a lot of it was training. We had gotten away from training against what our typical adversary was going to be. We were fighting against each other in similar performing airplanes, right?
Oh, yes.
And so they started the school to teach how do you maximize your airplane's capabilities versus the Vietnamese aircraft. They were flying Soviet MiG-15s, MiG-17s, and so forth.
MiGs, yeah.
And so after the bombing halt, and the first graduates from the school went back out and taught to their squadron mates, over time, the Navy shoot-down ratio went up to 13 to 1, whereas the Air Force that did not implement a training program at the time like that, they stayed, my understanding is, pretty much 3 to 1 or so for the duration. But they now have their version of it at Nellis Air Force Base and have enjoyed the results of that really great training. So that was sort of my Top Gun experience, and I can talk to you more about it. It certainly, we realized the movie wasn't going to be a documentary, but I think the flying scenes I think represent very well what the dynamic nature of air-to-air combat is all about. I mean, you got airplanes that are swirling all around. You're pulling 6-7 G's, so your body is, just imagine being 7 times heavier, your head being 7 times heavier, and you're looking around trying to keep track of everybody that's out there and so forth. It's really, but in the movie, the big difference in the movie is there's no award given in the class for individual performance because the emphasis is on teamwork and the students working together to develop, good plans and then go out and execute those plans with discipline in order to fight and survive. And so that's the key difference between Tom Cruise, Maverick and Iceman competing for the trophy. You know, that's not how
Yeah.
it is. So
Yeah, made for TV. The interesting thing about particularly flying in fast jets is the speed that your brain would have to work at. So, you know, I was a helicopter navigator, and that was mental enough. But you know, we're flying around at 120 knots, and you guys are going way faster. And as you said, there's aircraft all around you. It's like that speed of processing in the brain has just got to
yeah,
be
the speed
crazy,
and
right?
you're trying to you're operating in 3 dimensions, and some of the guys I
Yes.
flew with, I mean, they were unbelievable in being able to, you know, to deal in that environment. Frankly, I had to work pretty hard at it to keep up. But yeah, and so you have to keep things simple, right? You have to distill down a complex
Mm,
plan and have very specific things that you can tripwires, if you will, in the mission, so that you know what to do when, and you don't overly complicate it, so that you can execute in what we call, when your brain starts running on what we call stem power, right? Where everything's got the
yeah.
shooting's going on, the missiles are coming up, and you just have to execute, right? So you got to keep it simple, and you've got to train really realistically with repetition, so that it becomes something that's very,
Yes.
you can just react in the moment correctly.
Yeah, and look, it would have been the same with your flying training as my flying training, where they do, you know, you do a simulator flight, and the instructor can throw curveballs at you, and then you go up and you do that
Right.
flight in the air, which adds in a whole heap of complexities. But it's the graded, increasing graded exposure through the training and that repetition
Yeah,
that's
it is.
really
And
key,
in the
isn't
Top
it?
Gun class, you start out fighting one versus one, dog fighting. And then after a series of those, then you go two versus two, and you do a series of those. And then it becomes two versus, you don't know how many are going to be out there, 3, 4, 5. And then you put
Mm,
4 jets together, what we call a division. And now you go 4 versus unknown. And so, yeah, you're exactly right. You ramp up the complexity. You also ramp up what the threat is simulating. So we would start out with a very,
mm.
pretty basic threat, North Korea or something like that. And then as the scenarios went on, the threat would become more and more capable, until we got to the end of the program and the class had to do a graduation strike. And it was pretty exciting.
I can imagine. And I think the training protocols developed, and the ones that I experienced, the ones that you experienced, it's really best class training for anything, really. You know, that whole graded exposure, increasing to overload. And then I remember failing a flight, and they take you back a notch, and then reestablish your confidence, your baseline, and then you
Right,
add it again, and then things just get faster and busier and
right.
faster
And
and
that
busier.
the critical element of that learning process, um, there's a lot that goes into it, of course, but the critical element to it is something that is sacred in naval aviation, and I'm sure the same
I
in
know what you're
yours.
going to
Yeah,
say.
sure, of
Can I
course,
guess?
of course,
Can I guess?
exactly,
The debrief.
exactly.
The
And
debrief.
coming into the room and figuratively taking off the rank, and going into the room and being willing to figure out, okay, because nobody has the complete picture of what happened out there. So together
Mm,
you figure out, and you, first of all, you just want to objectively get out there what happened, and then based on that, then okay, why did it happen, and then what can we do to reinforce the things that went well, and also to correct the things that could be done better. And we had little tricks that we did. For example, to try to diffuse some of the ego in the debrief, we would talk in the third person. It wasn't you and me.
mm,
It was the blue fighter and the red fighter. and we would get a little bit
Yeah.
of cognitive distance from it to try to keep the ego out of it, so the student was more likely to absorb and take on mistakes and so forth if we did that. And then we always tried to, at the end, we really tried to, we would call it goods and others. And we would make a list
Right.
as a wrap up for the debrief, because again, we wanted to make sure we recognized what went well, but also point out, okay, now, what do we need to do tomorrow in order to continue to raise our game? And it's
Yeah.
really very cool once you embrace it. However, as I work with corporations and companies and business teams, they seem to struggle with all of that.
100%, 100%. And because I really wanted to go deep on this one, because I work with a lot of businesses as well. And I often tell a story that this was the thing that really made the power of a debrief sink in for me. We were all young instructors going through advanced flying training, pilots and observers or navigators. And one of the instructors who was a retired pilot, doing instructing, Nigel Hennell was his name, and he was so experienced. He'd been flying since the 60s. And he sat us down and he told us one day about when he first got his wings, and he went on the aircraft carrier. They sailed from Portsmouth and they sailed to the Far East. And he said by the time they got there, I think it was 3 months later, half of all the air crew on board were dead. Because he said flying helicopters off ships is inherently dangerous. And that was just jaw dropping. And he said that's where that culture of debrief came in so strongly. And it's not just about learning from your mistakes, but learning from others. And I'm sure it would be the same in the American military, that as an aircraft captain, you had to read all of the aircraft incidents that had happened, and sign that you had read them before you were allowed to take your aircraft out. And that culture of learning from others' mistakes and the willingness, like anytime there's an incident, there is that dissection of what happened, and whether it was pilot error, engineering, or whatever it was. And it's not to finger point. It's so that people can learn from others' mistakes, because with our crew, often you can't wait to learn from your own mistakes, right? And I think it's critical. And so many businesses don't do it. You'll have seen it, George. You'll be at these conferences and they're up there and they're talking about best practice and all that. And I'm like, who's there talking about the big fuck ups, right? So that people can learn from that. What's your take on this? I'm sure we're in violent agreement.
A couple of thoughts. One is, not only did we take time to investigate and debrief mishaps and so forth, but we would also do the same thing for near misses. We didn't want to be where, we lucked out on that one and then forget about it. We would assume, okay, we just had a midair out there. Now let's go back and figure out what happened, even though it wasn't, thankfully, we didn't have to pay the ultimate price for it. And I'll share with you a story from when I was with the Blue Angels, because I was the leader of the Blue Angels. And interestingly enough, you don't start as a wingman, at least in our organization, and then come up to be the leader. You come in as the leader. So I had much more experience than my wingmen did, because they were much junior to me in rank. But I didn't have any Blue Angel experience, which requires a level of consistent, very precise flying that I'd never been asked to do before, right? So my first couple weeks were really something, and I just remember being in a debrief at the end of my first week. And one of the things that we do in the debrief is I'm expected to share what significant mistakes I'm aware of that I made, because what that does is that gives my wingman an idea of to what degree am I aware of our own performance. Because if I'm
Yes.
making a
Yeah.
mistake and I don't recognize it, we got a problem. If I'm making a mistake and I'm not willing
Yeah.
to admit it, we got another problem, because you're not going to trust somebody who's
Yes.
not willing to be vulnerable, to be transparent, right? So anyway, we're sitting at the end of it's been a long week. We've been flying 2 and 3 times a day. I'm trying to not only fly precisely, but with the Blue Angels, we fly so close together that I have to talk while I'm flying, because I don't move either hand without first telling my wingman a command of preparation and then execution, right? So I'm trying to talk and fly. And anyway, at the end of the first week, I'm worn out, right? And we're in the debrief, and my bucket is so full. I remember the first, 15 minutes or 20 minutes of the flight. But after that, I can't remember all the stuff that went on out there and my mistakes. And finally, I said to the guys, because I finished my list, and then they said, well, boss, we also did this and this and this and this. And finally, in just a little bit of frustration and exasperation, I said, okay, you guys, don't you see I'm trying as hard as I can here? And God bless them, they looked at me, and very professionally and everything, they said, Roger that, boss. We know you're trying hard, but we don't grade on effort. We grade on performance. And in these 4 or 5 maneuvers, you suck. You got to get better. You can't be waggling your wings because we can't get in there, and so forth. And it was an aha moment for me, because I looked across the room at my wingman, and I realized they weren't bringing me this to make themselves look good or make me feel bad or point fingers. They were 100% wanted me to get better. And we as a team weren't going to get any better than, by definition, than that I as the leader flew, right? And so that was a switch for me that allowed me to embrace, okay, I want it all. Bring me all the truth you got, because I want to get really good and be worthy of, what the team stands for and where we want to accomplish. So it was pretty cool.
Yeah, and I think it's hugely important as well. I when I was flying in helicopters, particularly helicopter search and rescue, which is inherently dangerous. I mean, the culture, and I'm imagining the culture would be the same. There's 4 people there, one person makes a mistake, and 4 people are dead. So the debrief culture is tabs off. Rank does not matter in a debrief, and you brought it up, like somebody pulling the boss up and going, "You suck." Like you don't get that culture very much in business, do you? And it's I think it goes back to what you were talking about, the egos earlier on, but this is where performance tied to safety takes it up a notch, and where there's that desire for performance and the idea of mastery, then egos have to go, don't they?
And when I talk to groups, sometimes somebody will say, well, yeah, you guys had to be that way because it was life and death, right? And I say, yeah, you're right. But I don't believe that the principles change just because the consequences go up. We just couldn't compromise. We couldn't look away. And I tell them, look, if you'll take these principles and you apply them at your business, you're going to see massive improvement. Now, you don't have to be all the way to the end of the continuum like we had to, but if you just raised your game and the level of trust in your organization 15, 20, 30%, man, you'll see,
Game changer. Yeah, absolutely. Now, before we dive into, because I do want to really dive into your book, but when you transitioned from military to civilian life, What was that like? Was it bump? Because I did 8 years, and when I left, there was big holes whenever I left. But you did
Yeah.
what, 26 years? So how did you find that transition? And the second part of the question is, what do you
Yeah.
still
Well, the
miss?
answer to both is the same thing, and I'm sure it's the same for you. It's the people. It's very much a cliche, but
Mm,
cliches are often that way because they're true. I mean, when the people that you lived and worked with and sacrificed with every day, uh, you just got to a level of camaraderie that you don't see. I mean, you see it somewhere. I'm working with a company out here in California right now that has very a great culture and so forth. But generally speaking, uh, you don't have the same out there, the same sort of commitment to each other and all of that. So that was
mm.
the biggest change for me was giving leaving that team spirit, if you will.
And where do you think that? Because I've often thought about this. Like, where does that come from? Is it the overall military culture, and I mean, I think it's elements of it, right? The overall military culture, the very strong connection to purpose and mateship, but also I think living through shared
Yes. Yep.
adversity. Because in those situations, you kind of see into the soul of your oppo, don't you? And when you're in those dangerous, life-threatening situations, or even not even life-threatening, but just where you have to go to a level of yourself that you didn't know existed. I think in business, there's a lot of layers of the onion, I find. And then, when you go through those really tough experiences, you see into the other person's soul, and that creates that deep, deep, deep
It
level
does.
of trust, doesn't
It's
it?
the shared sacrifice. It's the importance of the mission, and it's and it does. While of course you go through some great adversity together, it really bonds you. But a lot of it is just, hey, this is a shitty situation, and we're all in it together, and let's make the best of it,
Well,
right?
yeah, that's
And out of that comes that bonding, and yeah, it's very powerful, no question about it.
mm. So what? So you transitioned, and now you are a high level coaching consultant for teams, and particularly around building high performance teams. So you wrote a book
Mhm.
on it, High Trust Leadership. So what motivated you to write the book in the
Well, when
first
I left
place?
active duty, I was living in the Boston area, and as I would meet people, and they found out a little bit about my background, I would get lots of questions about how did we train, how do we lead, how do we organize, and then I was getting invited to speak. And so initially, because they were actually paying me money, as my daughters would say, they're paying you to tell stories, Dad. Uh, so yeah,
That's my
so
life.
so because they were paying me money, I
Yeah,
wanted to give them value. So I
give
would try
value.
to give
Yeah.
them 26 years of leadership lessons in an hour, and while they loved the photos and the videos and the stories, I really felt like it was a mile wide and an inch deep. And a lot of it was stuff that,
Mm,
I mean, these universal principles that they could get it just about anywhere else, right? So I had lunch with a friend of mine who was a senior executive at Wells Fargo Bank. And he said to me, he said, I've been to hundreds of these keynote presentations. And I tell you, the ones that are really good are the ones that when I walk out, I'm thinking differently than when I walked in. So that forced me to
mm,
think about, okay, what is it about my experience that I can share that maybe they're not hearing anywhere else, or certainly not necessarily hearing it from the perspective that I'm going to share it. And that's when I came upon, okay, the one thing that we all took for granted, I'm sure, as we've been talking today, very much the same for you, um, anytime you're in a high-performing organization, the one thing they all have in common is trust is not something that's just nice to have. It's not just something that, hey, you put good people together and you're going to have it. I mean, we can see lots of sports teams where that's not the case, right? And so, and in my experience, every high performance team I was on, whether it was a fighter squadron in combat or Top Gun or the Blue Angels, trust wasn't something that was just nice to have. It wasn't some sort of HR initiative. It was a strategic imperative. I mean, we recruited for trustworthiness. We trained to build it every day. If you had it, you got rewarded and promoted. And if you lost it and you couldn't get it back quickly, you were either sidelined or you were gone, because we could not afford, as I'm sure, as you described in your helicopter, you had to really trust the other 3 guys in your crew. And so I just, share with people what were the things that we had to do to build a really high level of trust. And, it's not rocket science, but it's work. And you have to, proactively do it, because too many organizations don't really think about trust until it's broken or gone, and then they're struggling.
Yeah, and then there's big issues, isn't there? I mean, I run some high performance team stuff. I use Pat Lencioni's model. I'm not sure you're familiar with it. You probably are, but the bottom of that model is trust.
Foundational.
It's right at the bottom, and it's that, and it's not predictive trust, which is, if I've been working with someone for years, I kind of know what they're going to do, so I've got that level of trust. It's the deeper level of trust based on vulnerability and openness to share your fears, your failures, your apprehensions, and actually that's what I was talking about earlier on. When you go through that adversity or the hard training where you're under the pump, and you see under the levels of the onion, and we get that deeper trust. I think that's really key.
In my book, I describe 3 levels of trust. And I talk about, when I got to the Blue Angels, I had much more flight time, but I didn't have any Blue Angel time, as I'd said. So I was at trust 1.0, and this is sort of your garden variety trust. And, you hire somebody because they've been to the right schools, or they've done the right job, or whatever it might be. And you trust them to show up and, do their job. And then trust 2.0, and this was after I worked.
Sorry, sure. George, can I just clarify? Is that trust 1.0 based on their perceived capabilities?
Mostly. And, I'll give you a really mundane example. I mean, you're driving down the highway, and based on the guy coming the other way has done what was necessary to get a driver's license, you trust that they're going to stay on their side of the line, right? So it's what I call your garden variety trust, right? And my team said, look, boss, just fly your jet safely, and we're gonna show you in our training. We're going to become Blue Angels, right? So then I kept working, and I got to trust, what I call trust 2.0. And this is where we live most of our relationships. And this is it's conditional trust, right? If you do A and B, I'll trust you with C. Or it's selective trust. I'll trust you here, but I'm not trusting you over here, right? And it feels like a contract, sort of. In fact, that's why we have contracts, is because we're trying to raise the level artificially of trust. Everybody knows what's expected, and if you don't do it, here's what's going to happen, right? So you artificially mitigate the risk as best you can so that you can get a deal done. And so I kept working until finally, when we came out of winter training and we started doing Blue Angel air shows, I had invested in my teammates and they in me to the point that we said to each other, I trust you, period. And this is where the magic happens, right? This feels like a covenant. If trust 2.0 is a contract, trust 3.0 is a covenant. And that's when you get to the point where there's no hesitation. And that's when you can really move quickly. You can be very agile. You can adapt. The resilience goes way up. Productivity goes way up. Quality goes up. Everything does, right? If you make those investments. Unfortunately, too often organizations and teams aren't willing to devote the time and the effort consistently in order to achieve that level and maintain it.
So give us one or two things that a leader could do to take up the level of trust in their team. And I'm imagining there would be a reasonable amount of transfer to trust in personal relationships as well.
And this works at home, as well. And because it's universal, right? And a couple things that to be aware of. I mean, trust can't be bought. It can't be expected. It can't be demanded. It can't be coerced. It's a gift. And it's a gift that is given whenever you have behaved in a trustworthy manner that the other person is willing to give it. And so, I talk about 5 things that I had to do in order to earn this unconditional trust in my wingmen and they with me, right? And I'll go through them very quickly, and then you can drill down into whatever strikes your fancy. And you have to pay attention to all 5. If you drop one out, we were going to face an issue that we'd have to ultimately work on. But the good news is, for each one of them, it reinforces the other 4 so that there's an upward spiral of trust and confidence, right? So here, very quickly, and for each one, there was a question that my team was asking about me every day. And depending upon the answer they discerned, they would make a judgment about my trustworthiness. I believe these are the same 5 questions your listeners are being asked by their people in their lives, whether professionally or personally, either consciously or unconsciously. So here we go. The first one is character. And the question was simply, do you walk your talk? Do you live up to your responsibilities? Do you keep your promises? Do you own, whatever? Do you live our shared core values? And for us in the Navy and Marine Corps, it was honor, courage, and commitment. And my team was judging my character based on to what degree did I live up to those core values and our standards that we had as a team for excellence. And we had lots of, norms that the team had developed over the years. So that was the first one. The second one was commitment. Now, my team was absolutely certain that I would show up to lead them with a smile on my face when the sun was shining and the sky was blue and the air was smooth. But they knew that during our time together, we were going to have to go through some storms, because that's sort of how life is, right? You're either in a storm now, or you just came out of a storm, or look out, you're getting ready to go into the next one. Exactly.
This one coming.
So what they wanted to know was, are you going to be with us when the going gets rough? I mean, are you going to show up and play your A game when we're in the storm and be at your best leader and lead us to victory on the other side? Because if you're just going to show up and take names, cast blame, CYA, forget about it. We want you to be the best leader you can be. And oh, by the way, when we get down to a moment of truth where you have to make a choice between the team's interest or your interest, which one are you going to pick? That's what they want to know, right?
Yeah,
so that's
interesting.
Commitment. The third one is competence. Now, it's absolutely important to be trusted, particularly in your professional life, that you have to be very good at what you do. No question about it, right? But I put it third here for a reason, because I believe if you don't get the first 2, the third one doesn't matter. If a person doesn't walk their talk or be all in, then, forget about it. But if they do walk their talk, walk our talk, live our values, and they are all in, we can teach them. I mean, they have to have a certain amount of talent and skill, but we would trade off a percentage of some amount of skill in order to make sure we got the first 2. It wasn't necessarily the
Yeah.
ace of the base who became the Blue Angel. It was the guy who was, had great integrity, total commitment to the mission, and would come to work every day and accept constant professional constructive criticism in the debrief and not get discouraged, distracted, or let his ego get in the way. So every day as I walked in for a pre-flight briefing, and I would sit down at the conference table and I would look around at my wingmen gathered around, I could see the third question in their eyes. And the question was, are you good enough to be our leader today? Are you better than you were yesterday, but not as good as you're going to be tomorrow? Because we don't want to stay here. We want to keep getting better and better. And by definition, we as a team can't get better if you don't get better. So that was the third question. Then the fourth one is the one I think most leaders in this modern age have dropped off their radar scan, and that's connection. You see, by the middle of the season, I could do just about anything I wanted with my jet, and my guys would follow me. If I needed to speed the roll of the formation to stay under the clouds, I could do it. If I needed to pull harder at the bottom of a loop to avoid a ridgeline, I could do it. If I needed to tighten the turn with more G around a skyscraper, I could do it because I had invested in my wingmen such that they believed I knew what I was asking them to do out there as I changed the trajectory, right? But if for a minute they doubted that I understood what I was asking them to do, that's when you get hesitation, separation, disengagement, right? So the question, and this applied just as much on the ground as it did in the air with the sailors and Marines on the team. And the question was, do they believe you understand them? Which is a different question than do I believe I understand them? Because what I believe is interesting, but not sufficient. What matters is what do they believe? And when they believe that you get them, that you understand their concerns, their challenges, what you're asking them to do, what their hopes, their goals are, and that whenever you're making the tough decisions, you're taking them into account. When they believe you do that, even if the decision doesn't go their way, they'll join up and come along. But if they don't, then you always have friction and challenges, and it's like aerodynamic drag, on the airplane,
Yes.
So that's connection. And then the last one, quickly, is communication. If connection is, do they believe I understand them? Then communication is, do they understand me? Am I clear, concise, consistent, and direct in my transmissions? And are they receiving the messages that I intended when I sent it, right? And you saw that, in aviation, we have very specific protocols to make sure that there's no misunderstanding on the radios when you're assigned a heading or an altitude or whatever.
Yes.
And we need to implement those types of feedback in our communication strategies on the ground, in our work and in our life, right? Because the biggest challenge with communication for leaders is the presumption that it's occurred, right? I sent the email.
Yes.
I sent the email, they get it. I gave the talk, they get it. I had the one-on-one, she gets it. They don't get it, at least not yet, because they aren't as close to it as you are, right? And I like to say, how many times do you have to hear a new song before you get the lyrics? So we have to transmit consistently in a variety of forms until the audience gets the message, right? So
that old saying, you can never over communicate clarity.
And you've done it when they start making fun of you, right? Okay, I think they got it now.
Yeah, look, I love that the character, commitment, competence, connection, communication. So is that a hierarchy,
in my mind,
descending
it is,
hierarchy? And I see why you have put character first, because I mean, people can just they can they can smell it at 50 paces if
Yeah.
you're not
Yeah.
authentic, right? They really do. And that is what, and you know what, it reminds me, there's a couple of ones tied in together, character and commitment. I remember my first boss, Commander Jock Alexander, and people would have walked over broken glass for him. But we had there was a big night in the Naval Fleet of our Arms called Taranto Night, and it celebrated the Battle of Taranto, when our squadron went in and sunk half the Italian fleet, right? And so the tradition is that there's the whole mess dinner, and there's fires and stuff like that, and we tend to burn a piano at the end of it, right? And so it's typical aircrew stuff, right? But we were having it was a big do, and there was an admiral coming and things like that, and the commander of the base, who was not an aircrew guy, he was a fish head, right, as we call them. I don't know if you call the same in the States, but he forbade us to burn the piano, right?
So he's asking for it,
and all the aircrew were like, yeah. So what we did instead was we burnt a car. We didn't burn a piano. We got one of the guy's old cars, all chipped in, bought it off him, and burnt the car. And the next day, the commander of the base went ballistic, made us all stand on the parade ground in our dress uniforms, and started giving us a bollocking about burning the car. And the boss of the squadron, Jock Alexander, stepped forward and said, "Sir, I just need to interject. I told them they could burn the car." And the commander went, "In my office." And he never told us that we could burn the car, right? He took the hit for us, and geez, did we get a bollocking afterwards? But I tell you what, that is an example of that character and commitment to the team, isn't it?
And one thing I'd like to share about the character piece is that, no matter how self-aware you are, no matter how high your EQ is, you can't know how you're coming across to everybody else in the organization, because you just can't. First of all, you're not them, and second of all, you can't be everywhere all the time. And so sometimes leaders are they think they're doing the right thing, but for whatever reason, members of the team are receiving a different message. And some of that occurs, like, for example, in communication. If you're not communicating, if there's a gap in communication, people are going to fill the gap with stories or perceptions or whatever, right? So I share with...
Yeah, the brain is a prediction machine, and if people don't know, they make shit up, right?
We're story makers, right? We make stories all the time.
Yeah.
So I share with leaders that you need to have truth tellers in your organization, people that you trust, who will bring you the truth to let you know. They understand what you're trying to do. They understand what your values are. And you trust them to come tell you whenever the perception out there is that you aren't walking your talk, or for whatever. And perception isn't always reality, but that's what they're thinking, right? So, and here's the challenge, though.
Yes.
Okay. You authorize somebody to bring you the truth. They'll bring it once. And depending upon how you react to the truth, you may never see it again. So we as leaders, we have to be wise enough that however the truth shows up, that we are willing to look at it and objectively evaluate what is here that I need to act on. Maybe nothing, but maybe there's some things here. And let me ask you, who do you think, other than your spouse and your children, are the best people to bring you the truth?
Other than your spouse? See, I was going to say your children. The best people to bring you the truth. Probably the people that you're not that aligned with.
The people that don't like you very much, because they don't care how you feel about it.
Yeah. Good
And
points.
unfortunately,
Good
they're going to
points.
wrap it up, with a bunch of drama and stuff, and they're going to stick it at you, right? And so we have to be smart enough
Mm.
when that happens to unpack it and see, is there a kernel of truth in there somewhere, or is it just rubbish? I don't know, but we have to at least be smart enough to do that dissection.
That actually brings me. That's a great point, actually, George, and it brings me to something else that often I talk about, because often when we get an idea, and particularly as leaders, we go and we seek sounding boards, and we seek people who are similar to us and have similar thinking to us, and we're kind of bouncing it off the echo chamber. And I always say to people, go and pick the person who is thorny and prickly and who you've got a different point of view on and lots of things, and then bounce it off them, because then you'll get to the
Exactly.
essence of
Yep.
stuff,
You'll
right?
get a real test. Mm-hmm.
But that requires parking
Of
a little
course.
bit of your
Yeah.
ego, doesn't it? So George, tell us, in environments where trust has been eroded, because I will often talk about this. Like, you can build trust and build trust and build trust, and then if that trust is broken, the whole house of cards
Right.
comes tumbling down, right? You can be in a deep relationship with somebody personal, and the trust goes, and just everything's gone. So in that, where trust has been eroded, and maybe there might be two scenarios. Trust has been eroded because you've
Yeah.
done something as a leader, or then you go into a second scenario would be going into a new organization where trust was eroded because of the leader, and the culture just stinks because of that. So what could leaders do in those
Right.
two different
Well,
situations?
in the first one, Stephen Covey, who wrote the 7 Habits of Highly,
Seven Habits.
I think he has it right in that you can't talk your way out of something that you acted your way into, right? So step number one is to apologize in an authentic manner, but that doesn't do it, right? That's just gets you into the room, right? And then over time, you have to behave in a trustworthy manner such that you hope that the people will again regain trust in you. But you don't get to choose, right? And depending and sometimes when you're betrayed by somebody, the deeper the trust that you had together, the betrayal hurts more, right? So you may not get it back, but
yes.
you can't worry about that. You have to just do your best, and you have to hope that
try.
they will. And generally speaking, people are pretty forgiving. I mean, if you own it and you're sincere, and then you communicate that sincerity in your behavior over a period of time, people are pretty forgiving. So that would be my answer to the first scenario. And the second scenario, where you're walking into an organization that has as the trust has been broken, right? Then I think you, first of all, don't dwell on the past. You want to get them beyond that. But the challenge is that there's a lot of emotional inertia. And I've been involved in doing, some turnarounds with an organizations that had the trust had been broken. And I was constantly amazed at how long people held on to the feelings of betrayal, even though that leadership team was gone, but they just kept holding on to it and holding on to it, right? So you have to lead by example, and you have to, employ those 5 principles of being, walking your talk and being transparent and bringing it every day and trying to, here's who we are, here's what we stand for, and hopefully, you can turn it around. But, there were some people in this one organization I have in mind where they couldn't get over it. So at some point, they were no longer a good fit for our organization, and we needed to move them on. Unfortunately, they were a casualty of all of that. But you do your best.
And yeah, so some people can become, like some people have
Mm-hmm.
learned helplessness. That old classic experience with the animals where they have them in the cage and there's electric shocks and they keep getting shocked and then they stop and they take away the sides of the cage and still the animal doesn't try to get out.
That's right.
That's that learned helplessness. And I think there can be that there's sort of a learned uh, bad
Yeah.
egg attitude, right? Just because of what had happened. But is there a value in going into an organization where you know that there has been previous poor leadership? Is there value in getting the people together and letting them vent and letting them be heard and go through a cathartic process and take on their point of view and then explicitly act early on some of their things so that they actually go, hey, this
Yeah.
person
I
is
think that's,
different.
I mentioned connection. You want them to believe that you understand what they went through, right, as best you can. And
Mm,
so I think it's very helpful to to open up to that and to be willing to listen. And but then you better do something, right? And you may or may not agree with what they think is the path forward, but you need to take action. And if you're not going to respond directly to what they suggested or recommended, then you explain why. And you just be open with them. Look,
mm,
I know you thought we should go this way, but look, we're going to go this way because of this. And and then they need to be big enough to appreciate the fact that you were honest with them and that you kept them in the loop and let them know, right?
mm. Yeah, yeah. No, sage advice, as all of this has been sage advice, George. So for people who want to get your book, I think leaders, aspiring leaders, and it actually sounds to me like anybody who wants to have good relationships in their personal life, because that trust, high trust, you could almost take out the word leadership and put high trust
Yeah,
relationships and write a new book, right? So where can they go take it? It's available on all good bookstores. The name, I believe, is High Trust Leadership:
correct.
Building
Yep,
High
and it's
Performance
available
Teams.
Amazon and Barnes and Noble and that sort of thing.
All,
That's right.
all good
Exactly right.
bookstores, as we say,
That's
George.
that's right.
All good bookstores. And then if organizations want to book you to come in and talk to their team, do some work with their leaders,
Yeah, so
where's the
my
best place to
website
go to?
is georgedom.com. And imagine that, right?
Oh, well, I
Yeah,
like the
and
variety going on.
so they
Yeah.
can see what it's about, and yeah, they can easily contact me, and I'd love to come in and help out because that's what I'm trying to do. That's my mission now after the military is to help companies thrive.
And we all need another mission, don't
Exactly
we,
right.
George? Absolutely. I'm going to ask you one last question unrelated to this. Every time I'm in the States, I am blown away by the level of respect given to current and past military personnel, right? Boarding on aircrafts, I've been in talks where the amount somebody's been in the military, everybody stands up and applauds them. And it's mind boggling for me, having been in the British military and now being in Australia and have worked with the Australian military, you do not see that at all in Britain and in Australia. Where does that come from? Do you know where that
I'm
where
not
that
really
actually
sure.
comes
It's a
from?
wonderful question. I think some of it comes from uh, a sense of guilt about how veterans were treated coming back from Vietnam. Yeah, they were
From
really
Vietnam.
treated
Ah,
badly and
yes.
so forth. And I think the American public, and now once the norm is set, it just keeps being passed down. So I think that is the genesis of it. Because as I mentioned back at the beginning of this conversation, when I was growing up during Vietnam, I mean, nobody wanted to go in the military, but we
Mm,
we we bounced back from that, and it's interesting because It's a very low percentage of our population have served. There used to be many more, and
Yes.
and that's a little bit of a challenge for us. Also, is to make sure the American public continues to remain connected to the amazing work that's being done by the men and women in uniform.
Yeah, absolutely. George, this has been awesome. Thank you for your time, and I wish you all the best of luck, although you won't need it in your
Thanks
current
very much.
mission.
My pleasure. I really enjoyed it. Great conversation.